What happens when you are the last man standing in a war that has already been lost? When every brother you swore loyalty to is behind bars, every operation you helped build has been exposed, and law enforcement is closing in with nowhere left to run. On April 8, 2025, in Hawick, Auckland, the quiet streets of an East Auckland suburb were shattered by police sirens as New Zealand's national organized crime group moved in on a modest residential property. Inside was a 36-year-old man, the national vice president of one of the most feared outlaw motorcycle gangs in the world. In that moment, he knew his time as a free man was over. This was not just another drug arrest. It marked the capture of the last remaining senior leader of the Comancheros operating outside prison. It was the final piece in a long-running investigation that completed the dismantling of a transnational criminal organization spanning Australia and New Zealand. The Comancheros are a name that carries fear among rivals and respect within the outlaw biker world. Founded in Sydney, Australia, the club evolved from a motorcycle gang into a sophisticated, organized crime syndicate involved in methamphetamine importation, cocaine trafficking, money laundering, and extreme violence. But their expansion into New Zealand would prove to be both their greatest opportunity and their ultimate downfall. What began as Section 501 deportees arriving from Australia soon became a full-scale criminal invasion. For years, the Comancheros operated with apparent impunity, moving millions of dollars worth of drugs between Auckland and Christchurch, laundering money through legitimate businesses, and building an empire that appeared untouchable. Their New Zealand president, Paselica Nahu, openly declared that the Comancheros viewed themselves as the #1 gang in the country. But empires built on violence and drugs inevitably attract attention. In New Zealand, that attention came in the form of the most comprehensive organized crime investigation in the nation's history. To understand how the Comancheros rose to power in New Zealand, it is necessary to go back to 2016. That year, Australia's Section 501 deportation policy began sending convicted criminals back to their countries of birth. Since 2015, more than 3,000 individuals were deported under bad character provisions, including hardened criminals and senior gang members. One of those deportees was Paselica Nahu, formerly a sergeant-at-arms for the Comancheros in Australia. Unlike many deportees who struggled to re-establish themselves, Nahu saw New Zealand not as punishment, but as opportunity. The local criminal scene was dominated by traditional gangs such as the Mongrel Mob and Black Power, but there was space for an internationally connected organization with access to global drug suppliers. By 2018, the Comancheros officially established a New Zealand chapter. This was not just another motorcycle club setting up shop. It was the creation of a local cell of a global criminal enterprise with connections to Mexican drug cartels and advanced money laundering networks. By 2019, the Comancheros had become a major force in New Zealand's drug trade. Unlike traditional gangs that relied heavily on violence and street-level dealing, the Comancheros operated with a corporate-style structure. Police raids that year, part of Operation Nova, resulted in multiple arrests and the seizure of more than $3.7 million in assets, including luxury vehicles and motorcycles. Investigators uncovered evidence of an organized commission system, with leadership receiving a fixed payment for every kilogram of drugs sold. Even more alarming were allegations that profits were being used to fund military-style training for members, conducted by an overseas trainer brought into New Zealand for that purpose. The Comancheros were not just importing drugs, they were building a paramilitary-style organization. This shift marked a turning point. New Zealand police realized they were no longer dealing with a local gang problem, but with an international organized crime threat. As the network expanded, operations spread beyond Auckland. By 2024, the Christchurch chapter had become one of the gang's most profitable branches. An 8-month investigation known as Operation Avon revealed that drugs and cash were being moved regularly between Auckland and Christchurch, with police estimating that more than $15 million worth of drugs crossed between the North and South Islands. In August 2024, coordinated raids resulted in the arrest of every patched member of the Christchurch chapter. 18 men were charged with serious offenses, including participation in an organized criminal group and conspiracy to supply methamphetamine and cocaine. Police seized drugs, firearms, vehicles, cash, and property worth millions. While New Zealand authorities dismantled domestic operations, Australian police were uncovering the Comancheros' international reach. In November 2024, Australian Federal Police arrested senior members of the Brisbane chapter in connection with the largest cocaine seizure in Australian history. 2.34 tons worth approximately $760 million. The operation revealed direct links between the Comancheros and South American drug cartels, involving sophisticated maritime smuggling operations conducted hundreds of kilometers offshore. These arrests confirmed that the Comancheros were no longer simply buyers of drugs, but active partners in international trafficking networks, supplying both Australia and New Zealand. By early 2025, nearly every senior Comancheros figure in New Zealand was either imprisoned or facing charges. Police confirmed that more than 137 charges had been laid against members and associates, including office holders, patched members, and prospects. Only one senior figure remained free: the national vice president. Police linked him to multiple drug importation schemes, including methamphetamine seized at the port of Tauranga and cocaine imported earlier in the year. Investigators worked methodically, ensuring their case was airtight. On April 8, 2025, police finally moved in. The vice president was arrested in Hawick and charged with importing methamphetamine, involvement in cocaine importation, and participation in an organized criminal group. Authorities described the arrest as a significant milestone, representing years of relentless investigative work. With that arrest, every level of the Comancheros' New Zealand leadership had been neutralized. Their president remains in prison, denied early release due to ongoing risk assessments. Their chapters have been dismantled, their assets seized, their international connections exposed. Today, the Comancheros exist in New Zealand only as a cautionary tale. Their rise demonstrated how quickly a sophisticated criminal organization can exploit new territory. Their fall proved that sustained, coordinated law enforcement can dismantle even the most complex criminal empires. The arrest in Hawick marked the end of an era. The age of untouchable international motorcycle gangs operating freely in New Zealand is over. In an era of global intelligence sharing and international cooperation, there is no safe haven, no border thick enough, and no operation too complex to unravel. The 36-year-old man who believed he was the last free rider learned the same lesson his imprisoned brothers already knew. Every criminal empire ends the same way: handcuffs, courtrooms, and prison cells. The Comancheros learned too late that in the modern world, every connection that gives you power also makes you vulnerable. Every encrypted message can be cracked. Every financial transaction can be traced. And every victory only makes you a bigger target. Their empire is finished. Their brotherhood is broken. What remains is a cautionary tale about the cost of choosing crime over community. He was once Australia's most wanted man. Now Hakan Ayik sits behind bars in a Turkish prison. Ayik, accused of running a global drug empire, was dramatically arrested in Istanbul after spending more than a decade on the run. To the public, he became known as the Facebook gangster, a nickname earned by taunting police through social media, while allegedly overseeing one of the most sophisticated drug networks in the world. Ayik did not begin life as a hardened criminal. Intelligent, resourceful, and dangerously confident, he climbed Australia's criminal ladder through connections rather than brute force. While others relied on violence, Ayik focused on relationships, logistics, and business strategy. That approach transformed him from a local operator into an international crime figure. His rise first drew major attention in 2008, when police intercepted a small aircraft at Jandakot Airport near Perth, carrying methamphetamine and ecstasy worth approximately $7 million. At the time, it was the largest drug seizure in Western Australian history. Investigators linked the operation to Ayik, marking his emergence as a serious threat. Rather than retreat, Ayik expanded. He formed alliances with powerful criminal syndicates, including Chinese triads, Russian organized crime figures, and Mexican cartels. These partnerships gave him access to a global supply of drugs and the ability to move them into Australia at industrial scale. He also aligned with senior figures connected to outlaw motorcycle gangs, including the Comancheros, securing a nationwide distribution network. By 2010, Australian authorities believed Ayik was responsible for a significant share of drugs entering the country. But just as police began closing in, he vanished. Ayik fled Australia and relocated to Turkey, where he lived openly under an assumed identity, enjoying luxury cars, expensive travel, and high-end accommodation in Istanbul. For years, he appeared untouchable, but arrogance became his undoing. Unlike most fugitives, Ayik flaunted his wealth online. Social media accounts linked to his wife displayed luxury holidays, cars, and lifestyle details that caught the attention of investigators. Photos, videos, and even wedding footage placed Ayik in Istanbul, slowly dismantling the illusion of anonymity he believed protected him. Authorities discovered he had adopted a new name and identity, convinced he was beyond reach. He was wrong. Behind the scenes, law enforcement agencies were piecing together a far larger picture. Ayik was not just a drug trafficker. He was the central figure in what investigators called the Aussie Cartel, a multinational criminal syndicate responsible for an estimated third of Australia's drug importations. The cartel functioned like a corporation, relying on corrupt insiders within ports and airports, known as doors, to move shipments through customs undetected. The organization laundered money, ran illegal gambling operations, and engaged in human trafficking. Its structure allowed it to operate with minimal direct contact between leaders and shipments, insulating Ayik from exposure. But no system is perfect. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission began targeting the cartel's encrypted communications, financial trails, and international movements. As global cooperation increased, the walls began to close in. Encrypted phones once thought unbreakable were compromised. Financial networks were mapped. Associates were identified. Meanwhile, Australia's criminal landscape was shifting. In 2013, the Comancheros Motorcycle Club executed the largest patchover in Australian biker history, absorbing the majority of the Finks Motorcycle Club. The move reshaped organized crime in Queensland and ignited a new wave of violence. One of the most significant flashpoints came with Shane Bowden, a former Mongols member whose shifting allegiances made him a liability. On October 12, 2020, Bowden was ambushed in the driveway of his Gold Coast home. He was shot 21 times in a calculated execution, the result of weeks of surveillance, GPS tracking, and planning. The murder marked a turning point in Australia's biker wars and underscored how organized crime disputes had escalated into military-style operations. It also intensified law enforcement pressure on all major criminal networks operating in the country. As authorities continued dismantling these organizations, Ayik's empire began to collapse. International cooperation ultimately led to his arrest in Turkey, ending years of evasion. His capture symbolized a broader truth. No matter how powerful, wealthy, or well-connected a criminal becomes, time and persistence eventually catch up. Ayik's story is not one of brilliance, but of inevitability. A global empire built on secrecy, arrogance, and crime can only survive so long. In the end, borders offer no protection, encrypted phones no sanctuary, and wealth no immunity from justice. The footage reveals the cold precision of the killing. This was not a crime of passion or a spontaneous act of violence. The gunmen positioned themselves strategically, waited patiently for their target, and carried out the attack with the efficiency of trained operators. A total of 21 rounds were fired at Shane Bowden, 19 from a machine pistol and 2 from a shotgun, before the attackers ran back to a waiting silver Holden Commodore and fled the scene. The weapons used tell a story of their own. A machine pistol capable of firing up to 800 rounds per minute, paired with a pump-action shotgun, points to a level of firepower far beyond street-level gang violence. This was military-grade weaponry deployed in suburban Australia by criminal organizations with access to serious arms. Bowden's execution was intended to eliminate a problem for the Mongols. Instead, it ignited a conflict that would consume southeast Queensland for years. The murder of Shane Bowden sent shockwaves through Queensland's criminal underworld, but nowhere more than within the remnants of the Finks Motorcycle Club. Many within the club viewed the killing as a declaration of war by former brothers turned enemies. In the months that followed, a brutal turf war erupted between the Mongols and Finks across southeast Queensland, marked by firebombings, assaults, and escalating intimidation. Though the Finks had been severely weakened by the 2013 patchover, they were far from defeated. What remained of the club struck back at Mongols' targets with an intensity that surprised even seasoned observers of biker violence. On June 5, 2021, a barbershop in Windaroo was targeted in an arson attack. The attack on a civilian business signaled a dangerous shift. The conflict was no longer confined to clubhouses or known gang locations. Ordinary Queenslanders were now being drawn into the crossfire. 2 days later, on June 7, 2021, members of rival motorcycle clubs were involved in a violent brawl at Australia Fair Shopping Centre in Southport. A fight in a busy shopping complex during daylight hours marked a new escalation. This was no longer hidden violence in industrial zones or late-night ambushes. It was open criminal warfare in public spaces where families shopped and children played. Police later uncovered documents suggesting that chapters of both clubs, operating between Logan and the New South Wales border, were acting under attack-on-site orders following the arrest of a Mongols national office bearer allegedly linked to the Australia Fair brawl. Such orders represent the highest level of escalation in biker warfare. They authorize assaults or killings whenever rival members are encountered, regardless of location or collateral damage. The geographic scope of these orders, covering one of Queensland's most densely populated corridors, made clear this was not a localized dispute. It was a full-scale war spanning some of the state's most economically significant regions. As the Mongols and Finks tore each other apart, another organization was watching closely from the sidelines, calculating its next move. While southeast Queensland descended into chaos, the Comancheros Motorcycle Club began quietly preparing for expansion into what they viewed as Australia's most lucrative untapped criminal territory. Brisbane and the Gold Coast represented enormous opportunities. Drug markets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, major ports ideal for importation, and a criminal landscape weakened by ongoing conflict between rival gangs. This was not opportunism. It was strategy. Reports emerged that the Comancheros were in discussions with members of the Bandidos Brisbane Centro chapter about patching over. This followed the establishment of a Comancheros chapter on the Gold Coast. Rather than confronting existing gangs directly, the Comancheros pursued a calculated recruitment strategy, drawing experienced members away from rival clubs by offering stronger networks and international connections. These talks prompted the Bandidos' national executive to issue a directive ordering senior members across Australia to sever ties with the Centro chapter. The reaction underscored how serious the threat was. Losing an entire chapter to a rival organization was enough to trigger a nationwide response. The Comancheros' reputation is rooted in violence, most notably the 1984 Milpera massacre, a gun battle with the Bandidos that left 7 people dead and 28 injured. References to that event were not historical footnotes. They were warnings. Their expansion into Queensland coincided with police investigations into multiple drive-by shootings targeting rebels members in Brisbane's southern suburbs. The timing was deliberate. The Comancheros were moving in as existing gangs were distracted, weakened, and under intense scrutiny. They were not planning to coexist. They were planning to dominate. As the Comancheros advanced, another major shift reshaped Queensland's criminal landscape. The collapse of the Rebels Motorcycle Club, once Australia's largest outlaw motorcycle gang. An internal civil war, sparked in Western Australia, triggered one of the largest mass resignations in Australian underworld history. The crisis stemmed from resentment toward the rebels' national leadership, which WA chapters believed had failed to support them during violent conflicts with the Mongols. Senior figures walked away after decades of membership, appalled by what they saw as abandonment of jailed members and a breakdown of leadership integrity. The fractures spread nationwide, including into Queensland, leaving the club weakened and vulnerable. Wherever the Mongols clashed with rivals, those rivals emerged fractured. The Comancheros capitalized on this pattern, recruiting experienced defectors from the rebels and other clubs. These were not isolated moves. They were part of a broader strategy to consolidate power. The Comancheros were no longer just another outlaw club. They had become one of the most feared organized crime groups in Australia, built through calculated expansion, sophisticated criminal operations, and the systematic absorption of rival talent. Their push into Queensland placed them on a direct collision course with the Mongols. By 2024, all the elements were in place for the most significant biker conflict in Queensland's history. The Mongols controlled much of the Gold Coast through intimidation and violence. The Comancheros were advancing north with superior organization and international reach. Traditional Queensland clubs were weakened by infighting and defections. Law enforcement responded with Operation Morpheus, a coordinated national task force involving Australian and New Zealand agencies. On November 28th, specialist police executed 33 search warrants targeting Comancheros-linked operations. The raids uncovered firearms, ammunition, large sums of cash, drugs including methamphetamine and cocaine, and illicit tobacco and vapes valued at more than $1.5 million. The seizures revealed what was truly at stake: control of criminal enterprises worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Meanwhile, violence spread into other territories. In Binlay, rival bandidos and rebels chapters clashed. Drive-by shootings targeted members' homes, followed by the burning of stolen getaway vehicles. The attacks increasingly took place in residential neighborhoods, placing innocent families at risk. Today, southeast Queensland sits on the edge of a conflict unlike any Australia has seen. The weapons are deadlier, the surveillance more advanced, and the organizations more professional than in past biker wars. Gangs no longer rely on visible patches or obvious clubhouses. They blend into legitimate businesses, using anonymity to evade police and consorting laws. These changes make the coming conflict harder to detect, harder to prevent, and harder to prosecute. Attack-on-site orders spanning densely populated regions raise the risk of civilian casualties to unprecedented levels. Shopping centers, schools, and family homes are all potential battlegrounds. Both the Mongols and the Comancheros maintain international connections capable of bringing resources and reinforcements from overseas, escalating a regional conflict into one with national and global implications. Shane Bowden's execution set this chain of events in motion. What followed was not chaos, but inevitability. The major players are positioned. Alliances are shifting. Territory worth hundreds of millions of dollars is contested. And between these warring factions stand ordinary people who will bear the consequences of a war they never chose. The question is no longer if this war will begin, but when. But on that May evening, it appeared those very rules had been turned against him. Detective Senior Sergeant Thompson was blunt in his assessment. This was a targeted attack, and there was no ongoing risk to the public. The message was unmistakable. This was club business, handled in the most brutal way possible. What followed would reveal a level of planning that ruled out any notion of a crime of passion. Using CCTV footage from across Perth's southern suburbs, detectives began reconstructing the movements that led to Leslie Grantham's near-fatal ordeal. The major breakthrough came from an unlikely location: Auburn Grove train station, a key transport hub serving Perth's rapidly growing southern corridor. Opened in 2017 and handling nearly 4,000 boarding passengers daily, the station sits in the median of the Kwinana Freeway and is covered by extensive surveillance. CCTV footage revealed something extraordinary. Several individuals met at the station prior to the attack and swapped vehicles. This was not spontaneous violence. It was an operation planned with precision. A white and gray dual-cab utility, bearing the registration 1BFC417, became central to the investigation. Police allege this vehicle was used to transport Grantham to a remote location, where he was shot and burned, before the same vehicle was used to dump him outside Rockingham Hospital. The vehicle swap at Auburn Grove strongly suggested multiple offenders, each assigned a specific role. The choice of location was deliberate. The station offered numerous escape routes, and the constant flow of commuters provided cover for suspicious activity. The code of silence. What happened next frustrated investigators and highlighted one of the greatest challenges in prosecuting outlaw motorcycle club crimes. Despite being the victim of an attempted murder, Leslie Grantham refused to cooperate with police. Western Australia's police commissioner, Colonel Blanche, was direct. Grantham was refusing to assist because he was following the club's code of silence. This code, deeply ingrained in outlaw motorcycle club culture, forbids cooperation with law enforcement under any circumstances, even when a member has suffered life-threatening injuries at the hands of their own brothers. The code demands silence, Commissioner Blanche explained. Even victims become unwilling participants in protecting those who tried to kill them. The code of silence is not just about loyalty, It is about survival. Within these organizations, being labeled an informant can be a death sentence. For Grantham, speaking to police may have offered justice, but it could also have invited further violence. The Comanchero legacy. To understand the violence that unfolded in Perth, it is necessary to understand the history of the Comanchero Motorcycle Club. Founded in Sydney in 1966 by Scottish immigrant William George Ross, the Comancheros quickly developed a reputation as one of Australia's most violent outlaw motorcycle clubs. Ross, who styled himself as Supreme Commander, ran the club with rigid military-style discipline. The club's history is marked by bloodshed. The 1984 Milpera massacre, a shootout between the Comancheros and the Bandidos, left 7 people dead and 28 injured. The violence unfolded during a Father's Day gathering, turning a family-friendly venue into a war zone. In 2009, the Sydney airport brawl between Comancheros and the Hells Angels resulted in the death of Anthony Zervas. The fight, captured on CCTV and witnessed by dozens of travelers, demonstrated the club's willingness to bring its conflicts into public spaces. Perth chapter struggles. The Comancheros' expansion into Western Australia has long been plagued by setbacks and internal turmoil. Their early efforts to establish a foothold in Perth were disrupted by Operation Baystone in 2010, which targeted key figures before operations could fully take hold. Steve Milankovsky, who was due to be patched in as the Perth chapter president, was arrested along with associates during a major drug operation that seized 7.5 kilograms of methamphetamine. He was later sentenced to 17 years in prison as the operation's kingpin. Despite these setbacks, the Comancheros eventually established a Perth chapter, operating from premises on Wellman Street in Northbridge. However, the club has remained under sustained pressure from law enforcement, with multiple high-profile arrests for drug trafficking, money laundering, and armed robbery. According to police sources, Grantham's brutal treatment was linked to an alleged attempt to leave the club. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, leaving is not as simple as walking away. Membership is often described as permanent. Those who attempt to exit, particularly senior figures such as sergeants at arms, can face severe consequences. The club views departure as betrayal, especially when it involves someone with deep knowledge of operations and internal structures. The burning of Grantham's club-related tattoos was not merely an attempt to remove identifying marks. It was a calculated act of punishment and humiliation. These tattoos symbolize loyalty, commitment, and years of service. Their forced removal sends a clear and terrifying message. The methodical nature of the burns suggested deliberate intent. Someone took the time to target specific tattooed areas, transforming symbols of brotherhood into instruments of pain. 3 days after the attack, no charges had been laid. Despite police having what Commissioner Blanche described as a strong indication of who was responsible, the investigation faced familiar obstacles: uncooperative witnesses, a silent victim, and a culture designed to shield perpetrators. The release of CCTV footage showing the vehicle swap was a strategic move, aimed at pressuring those involved and encouraging public tips. The distinctive dual-cab utility became a focal point, but identifying its occupants would require extensive investigation. The attack on Leslie Grantham was not an isolated incident. It formed part of a broader pattern of internal violence within outlaw motorcycle clubs across Australia. Power struggles, internal disputes, and attempts to leave have repeatedly resulted in extreme violence. In recent years, there have been multiple cases of members targeted by their former brothers. The use of burning to remove tattoos has become an increasingly common punishment, serving as a warning to others who may consider betrayal. At Royal Perth Hospital, medical staff worked to save Grantham's life while police waited nearby, hoping he might eventually cooperate. The gunshot wounds to his thigh and shoulder were serious but survivable. The burns, however, required specialized treatment. They were inflicted not for tactical reasons, but for symbolism, highlighting the calculated cruelty of the attack. Grantham would eventually recover physically and be released from hospital. The psychological trauma, however, was likely to endure far longer. While the organization maintained silence, the message sent by Grantham's treatment was unmistakable. No one is above club justice. The planning, the vehicle swap, and the deliberate dumping at a hospital pointed to a coordinated response, not a spontaneous act. It was a warning to any member contemplating leaving. Loyalty, the club made clear, is not optional. The attack occurred during a period of major change in Perth's outlaw motorcycle scene. Senior Rebels members, including Carl LeBrook, had recently defected to the Comancheros following disputes with national leadership. LeBrook's public appearance in Comanchero colors marked a significant recruitment coup, but also introduced new tensions. Influxes of defectors raise questions of trust and loyalty, making Grantham's alleged attempt to leave especially dangerous. The attack prompted heightened surveillance of outlaw motorcycle clubs across Perth. Detective Senior Sergeant Thompson confirmed police would be closely monitoring gang activity to prevent retaliation and gather intelligence. The investigation involved specialist units, including the Gang Crime Squad, experienced in navigating the legal and cultural complexities of outlaw motorcycle clubs. Months later, the investigation continues. Police have evidence, surveillance footage, and suspects. What they need is time. The same silence that protects these organizations also makes them vulnerable to long-term pressure. Circumstances change. Alliances shift. Silence can crack. For investigators, the goal is not just solving one attempted murder, but confronting a culture of violence that has persisted for decades. Leslie Lethal Grantham survived, but his case exposed the brutal reality of outlaw motorcycle club justice. In this world, loyalty is enforced through silence, and betrayal is punished with fire. The white dual-cab utility has been located. The CCTV footage has been analyzed. The investigation continues. But the broader questions remain. What is the true cost of loyalty? And what price is paid by those who try to leave? One thing is certain. The attack on Leslie Grantham was not just an attempted murder. It was a message. In the world of the Comancheros, some betrayals are never forgiven, and some consequences are far worse than prison.